I remember sitting on the edge of my bed one evening, staring at the ceiling as my mind raced faster than I could follow. It was like a relentless storm of thoughts swirling in a chaotic dance, every scenario unfolding with alarming clarity, every possible mistake flashing before my eyes. I tried to quiet it, but the harder I tried, the louder the chatter became. It felt like I was trapped in my own mind, a prisoner to the constant overthinking that made even the simplest decisions feel impossible to make. I wasn't just thinking, I was analyzing, dissecting, forecasting, and second-guessing every tiny detail, as if my mental agility was a superpower, but really, it was a cage. You might know this kind of mental trap all too well. Maybe you're there now. Only your thoughts aren't your allies. They're the very thing holding you back. I've been there, walking through that labyrinth where each turn feels riskier than the last, where every choice becomes a maze of what-ifs and maybes that keeps you glued to the same spot, unable to move forward. The cruel irony is that the closer we look for answers, the more elusive they become. I've felt the exhaustion of knowing there's a better path somewhere, but being paralyzed by the very act of trying to find it. What's maddening is how it all starts with such good intentions. I thought my endless pondering was just thoroughness, my way of preparing for anything life could throw at me. Sometimes, I even pride myself on how deeply I can analyze a situation. But somewhere along the way, that strength turned against me. Instead of clarity, my mind became a battlefield where fear, doubt, and hesitation fought for control. Anxiety crept in quietly, seeping beneath my skin, warping reflection into relentless rumination. It wasn't just about thinking anymore. It was about being stuck inside my own head. I'd catch myself late at night, going over conversations with coworkers or friends, twisting words into doubts, replaying moments as if trying to rewrite history. Decisions that once seemed straightforward now felt like traps with no exit. Should I call back or wait? Should I accept this opportunity or keep searching? Should I say yes or no? Each question multiplied into 10 more, and then 100. The mental map grew so complicated, I couldn't trust my compass anymore. The anxiety wrapped around me like chains. Even the smallest choice felt like stepping onto a tightrope without a net. Sometimes, I asked myself why I couldn't just break free. Why my mind wouldn't stop spiraling. I realized it wasn't just about thinking too much. It was about how my thoughts were tangled with fears, fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, fear of uncertainty itself. I noticed a strange pattern. The more I tried to control the outcome by thinking it through, the less control I actually had. It was like my mind was pretending to be in charge, but really it was spinning in circles, stuck on repeat. I also saw how confusing my thoughts for actual control kept me frozen. I told myself that analyzing every angle would shield me from surprises. If I could predict every bad outcome, maybe I could avoid failure altogether. But instead of guarding me, that mindset trapped me in a prison of my own making. I became wary of taking action, fearing that once I moved, the anxiety would only worsen. So I stayed put, hoping that thinking more would bring clarity, but all it did was deepen my paralysis. This all wasn't just a problem in my head. It affected how I showed up in my life, at work, with friends, even within myself. I missed moments because I hesitated too long. I watched opportunities slip away because the weight of my own mind stopped me dead in my tracks. And the more time passed, the louder the voice inside my head grew, convincing me that this was just how I was wired, that this mental exhaustion was normal. But deep down, I knew there had to be another way. I knew I wasn't meant to feel this stuck forever. There was something about the way I thought, yes, but also about the way I related to my thoughts and feelings, something I hadn't fully understood yet. The journey out of this tangle wasn't about stopping thinking. It was about changing how I moved through my thoughts, about shifting that energy so it could serve me, not trap me. If you're listening to this, I want you to know you're not alone in this. The mind is powerful, yes, and sometimes that power can feel like a storm you didn't sign up to weather. But there is a path forward, one that leads out of the maze and back into action, back into clarity. It's not about silencing your mind. It's about learning how to step out of the whirlwind when it swirls too fiercely. And from there, you can find your footing again, steady, confident, free. As we begin this conversation, I invite you to lean into your experience with kindness. Notice where your thoughts take you, but don't judge yourself for wandering. We'll explore together what keeps us tangled in overthinking and how to gently break that cycle. This isn't about quick fixes or forcing your mind to shut off. It's about understanding the invisible forces that bind you and uncovering how the simple act of recognizing them can start you on a new path. So take a deep breath with me, and let's start to unravel this story, because the hero of this journey is not the mind that traps you, but the courageous heart inside you that's ready to move forward. I recall one afternoon when I found myself locked in a mental tug-of-war, wrestling not with an external challenge, but with my own expectations. I was preparing to send an important email, something that could open new doors professionally, but instead of hitting send, I caught myself endlessly rewriting each sentence, scrutinizing every word's nuance. My inner critic whispered doubts. Could this be misinterpreted? Am I coming across as too eager? Too distant? This internal debate unfolded over hours, turning a single task into a mountain of hesitation. The weight of these split-second judgments crushed my initial enthusiasm and gradually drained my energy. In that moment, I realized how covert self-imposed standards build invisible walls, trapping me under pressure from within. This relentless search for perfection often masks deeper insecurities. I observed how unrealistic ideals propelled me into a cycle of self-criticism, eroding my confidence in subtle ways. Instead of trusting my instincts, I subjected every decision to a rigorous mental audit that left little room for genuine spontaneity. When I reflect on those scenarios, I notice how expectations cloaked in should statements tighten the grip of overthinking, steering me away from authenticity. This habitual pursuit to meet imagined benchmarks breeds paralysis, not because my mind lacks solutions, but because I place those solutions behind an ever-moving finish line I can't reach. Another instance etched into my memory involves a conversation with a close friend. She shared a dilemma, choosing between two paths in her career that both held promise, yet carried uncertainty. As she spoke, I found myself unintentionally constructing a mental scoreboard of pros and cons, forecasting outcomes decades ahead. My urge to forecast scenarios intended to offer clarity, but the barrage of possibilities I painted in my mind silently overwhelmed her in that moment. Afterward, I realized how imposing this pattern on others can inadvertently amplify their anxieties. It became clear that overanalyzing doesn't only isolate us within ourselves. It can also create barriers in our relationships when we entwine worries with well-intended advice. I also began to recognize a subtle yet powerful trap, mistaking thinking for actual progress. During one particular project, I convinced myself that drafting numerous outlines, revising again and again, and endlessly contemplating contingencies were productive acts. While those actions fed a sense of diligent preparation, I was effectively delaying necessary movement. It felt like I was circling a starting line, believing preparation was the same as forward motion. Yet, true progress demanded stepping beyond mental rehearsals into real, sometimes messy, action. This blurring between rumination and execution became a roadblock I had to confront sharply. When I invited reflection on these moments, a striking metaphor emerged. Overthinking can resemble a traveler spinning kaleidoscopes, endlessly shifting colorful fragments, but never setting foot beyond the doorway. The mind delights in reassembling experience into different patterns, yet this mental kaleidoscope often keeps us captive, hypnotized by shifting perspectives without tangible change. This pattern can trick us into mistaking brilliance for movement, while quietly draining our willpower. Recognizing this illusion helped me cultivate a clearer boundary, valuing insight while refusing to trade action for endless contemplation. Now, consider how this applies when you face a choice that feels weighted with consequence, such as deciding whether to express a need, confront fear, or pursue a new ambition. In those moments, I've noticed how my attention fragments into competing priorities, each clamoring for dominance. One voice fears failure, another clings to comfort in uncertainty, yet another craves certainty that reality rarely offers. This internal fragmentation bends mental energy inward, scattering it until resolve dissolves. Yet underneath these competing narratives lies a simpler truth, one that doesn't require elaborate mental maps. Every meaningful step forward involves embracing risk and imperfection as allies, not adversaries. The subtle art I've begun to embrace centers on noticing when my mind drifts into this internal maze and gently redirecting it, not with force, but with curiosity. Instead of attempting to extinguish thoughts, I practice viewing them as fleeting clouds, luminous displays in an otherwise expansive sky. This shift from resistance to observation has lessened the habitual urgency to solve or control. I've learned to respect the richness of mental life without granting it unchallenged rule over my actions. Gradually, this growing awareness carves pockets of peace amid mazes of consideration, reminding me that freedom lies less in endless planning and more in deliberate movement through uncertainty. In sharing these experiences, I hope you sense how nuanced this mental landscape is. Not a simple matter of thinking too much, but a complex interplay of expectations, mistaken progress, and fractured attention pulling us away from authentic engagement. It's a reminder that liberating ourselves requires more than willpower. It demands compassion toward our own mental rhythms and a willingness to let go of control long enough to trust the journey unfolding beneath them. One evening, as rain quietly tapped against the window pane, I found myself caught in a silent duel between my desire to decide and an overwhelming urge to postpone. The choice seemed trivial, yet my chest tightened, and my thoughts raced like untamed stallions. I realized I was entangled in a subtle trap, mistaking endless planning for preparation, confusing hesitation for prudence. My heart yearned to move, but an unseen current held me back, pulling me into an abyss where possibilities multiplied, but certainty vanished. What struck me most in moments like that was how sharply my emotions undermined my ability to progress. There was an invisible battlefield beneath my reasoning, where fear and hope wrestled unnoticed. Instead of merely weighing facts, I sensed my feelings orchestrated a complex dance influencing each assessment. The urgency to avoid mistakes often morphed into a desperate craving for assurance, an itch that no number of mental calculations could soothe. I began to comprehend that emotional turbulence didn't simply accompany my considerations. It actively dictated their trajectory, turning potential breakthroughs into circular mazes. As I mulled over a career crossroads weeks later, I experienced a newer, deeper kind of resistance. It wasn't just about figuring out pros and cons anymore. It was draining, as if a stubborn fog had settled in my chest. I sensed that beneath the noise, my psyche sought something vital, safety through control. I attempted to harness the whirlwind of thoughts by obsessively gathering more information, convinced that knowledge equaled power. Yet ironically, this quest for mastery only deepened my hesitation, much like grasping at an elusive shadow that retreats whenever approached. One day, my colleague shared how she overcame her own paralysis, and her words opened a door for me. I stopped trying to solve everything up front. Instead, I choose to act on what's clear, allowing uncertainty to live with me without surrender. Her courage to embrace imperfection and ambiguity illuminated a path I hadn't considered. It showed me that sometimes clarity isn't born from unraveling every thread before moving forward, but from trusting that steps taken imperfectly keep the journey alive. This shifted my understanding profoundly. Analysis that imitates stalling isn't preparation, it's avoidance. Later, in a quiet cafe, as I watched people engrossed in conversation and laughter, I identified how this avoidance often disguises itself as control. We build elaborate mental fortresses, attempts to shelter ourselves from unpredictability, but in the process, we cut off our access to spontaneity and possibility. I questioned why I clung so tightly to those walls, convincing myself that postponing action was wisdom. Deep down, I recognized that fearing emotional discomfort masquerades as rational caution, yet it gradually erodes confidence and diminishes joy. I realized that embracing vulnerability, to risk stumbling, to confront uncertainty head-on, could open doors that meticulous planning never will. In one particularly vivid memory, I recall a late-night walk beneath a swollen moon when I rebuked myself silently for stalling. The crisp air seemed to echo my frustration with the inertia I could no longer hide. I imagined my indecision as a heavy fog settling over a once bright landscape, obscuring paths that had always been there. But as I breathed in the stillness, a thought surfaced. Clarity isn't a destination, it's an unfolding. Holding space for not knowing becomes a kind of bravery, a bold surrender to the fluid rhythm of life, one that requires stepping forward with incomplete maps but open hearts. I noticed how, when caught in this paralysis, my attention darted obsessively between imagined outcomes, as if scanning headlines for a guaranteed future. Yet paradoxically, this chase disguised a deep mistrust in my capacity to adapt, to navigate surprises spontaneously. I questioned why certainty seemed so sacrosanct, only to realize it's often a mirage built from fears patched together over years. Releasing this fixation on absolute firmness didn't mean recklessness. It meant acknowledging that life's pulse flows through unpredictability and that our resilience is forged not in control, but in how we dance with change. In exploring these moments, I also faced the hidden exhaustion beneath overthought choices, the fatigue that comes from overextending mental and emotional energy without rest. I recollected those nights of weariness where my brain raced past exhaustion's threshold, orbiting concerns relentlessly until solitude became suffocating. Recognizing this unveiled a new layer. Overanalysis can fragment attention and deplete vital reserves, leaving us vulnerable and disengaged. It taught me to honor signals of strain, to pause and replenish, to resist the temptation to keep spinning in circles while overlooking the strength that grows in stillness. This evolution in understanding dismantled old battle strategies I clung to for so long. I began inviting gentleness into my internal dialogues, acknowledging the ache beneath hesitation without judgment, offering compassion where I'd piled expectations. Instead of confronting fear with force, I found that patience and acceptance fostered shifting energies and softened rigid patterns. The mental restarts that followed were often small acts, setting aside overwhelming options to focus on one tangible step, or breathing deeply into moments of discomfort rather than fleeing them. Through these practices, a new rhythm emerged, one that celebrated commitment to movement over certainty of outcome. As I continued navigating these intricacies, I learned that surrendering the illusion of total control doesn't diminish intelligence, it expands wisdom. There's profound strength in knowing when to let go of the need to predict every curve in the road, and instead trust the process unfolding beneath our feet. I invite you to consider how this applies to your own inner dialogues when caught in that hazardous stillness. What might await, just beyond the walls constructed by relentless calculation, if you dared to step through them, even uncertainly? Your courage to try may be the most transformative act of clarity you've ever made. The moment hit me unexpectedly during a team meeting when a straightforward question about project direction suddenly spiraled into a whirlpool of doubts and scenarios. As my colleagues exchanged clear-eyed suggestions with confidence, I noticed my mind drifting into labyrinths of what-ifs far removed from the present moment. I scanned endless projections. What if this idea falls flat with stakeholders? Or if the timeline collapses? What if yesterday's comment signals deeper disapproval? The intensity grew until my lips sealed, the urge to voice uncertainty overpowering my ability to articulate any thought at all. It was as though I had become a spectator of my own hesitation, trapped in an invisible fog cast by my swirling imaginings. That day, I acutely sensed how overthinking can silently fracture our connection to others. Sometimes, the vast mental tapestries we weave erect walls between us and the natural flow of conversation or decision-making. Emotions that once sparked curiosity and engagement become entangled threads of anxiety and avoidance. I wondered if, through this very process, I was inadvertently signaling disinterest or detachment where vulnerability dwelled beneath. This realization sparked frustration and tenderness simultaneously, a reminder that intellect, when untethered from embodied presence, may undermine the very relationships we value most. Several weeks later, as I ventured into unfamiliar territory signing up for a public speaking course, those old patterns surfaced anew, but under a different guise. Instead of rehearing every word obsessively, an internal voice critically cataloged potential mistakes, possible embarrassment, and cumulative judgments. Yet, during the first session, something shifted when the instructor invited us to share without preparation in the moment. My anxiety ignited fiercely at first, but layering that panic with raw authenticity unexpectedly began to dissolve barriers. Through stuttering confessions and imperfect sentences, I discovered an unexpected gateway. Imperfection liberates us from the tyranny of overanalyzing. After class, I reflected on how this fragile courage to act despite tangled thoughts cultivates resilience, like muscles trained through discomfort rather than sheltered by deliberation. The contrast between theoretical readiness and embodied engagement became clearer. While overanalyzing feels safe because it postpones risk, it starves us of essential growth. The paradox is clear. Growth unfolds only when we allow ourselves to move forward even amid uncertainty, not once we've mapped every outcome exhaustively. I caught glimpses of liberation by embracing messiness, my voice shaking but alive, stepping beyond paralyzing computations. On another occasion, during a casual hike with a close friend, a conversation began about the many choices overwhelming her in daily life. Small gestures, plans, diets, social media decisions, the noise of constant consideration. I related deeply, hearing echoes of my own fatigue beneath her words. Yet, she shared a simple practice that shifted her experience, identifying her decision energy like a limited currency to be spent consciously and sparingly rather than burned on endless mental trials. Visualizing decision-making as a resource reframed struggles not as weakness, but as an invitation to prioritize what truly demands attention. This metaphor stuck. Cognitive energy is finite and precious, and protecting it means reclaiming power over our thoughts. That walk also prompted me to explore moments when overthinking masquerades as responsibility. For example, when caught between taking initiative and needing perfect certainty, my impulses often cower behind justifications of prudence. However, with time, I realized how those justifications sometimes cloak deeper fears, fear of failure, rejection, or change. It's as if my mind casts itself in a guardian role, shielding me from imagined harm at the expense of growth. Reconsidering this protective narrative unraveled layers of self-imposed limitation. I began to see courage not as the absence of fear, but as the willingness to proceed alongside it. During a quiet evening as dusk painted warm hues across the sky, I journaled about these discoveries. I described overthinking as a swirling river that, in its turbulence, distracts us from noticing the solid ground beneath. The impatience and unease can blind us to simple truths waiting in silence. Often, progress isn't about forging new currents, but pausing long enough to step onto stable stones already present, then choosing the next footfall deliberately. Trust grows only through movement, not by endlessly circling the same waters. Through these unfolding moments, I gained appreciation for embracing the friction between mind and heart. Instead of attempting to extinguish mental chatter, I learned to invite it into dance with embodied sensations, breath, heartbeat, grounding touch. This dialogue deepens self-awareness and gently loosens rigid patterns that fuel paralysis. I realized the mind's restless questions can become allies when met with compassion, offering insights without dictating actions. Gradually, I took steps toward fluidity, choosing action as a bridge between internal reflection and external reality rather than its adversary. Now, if you imagine yourself at a pivotal crossroads, inundated by a storm of thoughts digging into every angle, what might change by seeing those thoughts less as commands and more as clouds drifting across a vast sky? What strength might emerge if you directed your energy towards small, deliberate acts instead of perfect solutions? That shift, from wrestling with each mental knot to weaving a fabric of consistent motion, is where I found space to breathe, to choose, and ultimately, to live more freely. Late one evening, I found myself pacing the floor of my apartment, restless and uneasy. The walls seemed to close in as an endless stream of possible futures paraded through my head, each demanding attention. I remember gripping the armrest of my chair, trying to ground myself, but the flood of thoughts surged relentlessly. What struck me that night was not only the sheer volume of ideas, but the way each potential decision dissolved into a dense fog of what-ifs and buts. It was as though every option was painted with shadows, making certainty vanish entirely. I realized that my struggle was not with complexity itself, but with the absence of emotional latitude within my mental explorations. The creeping sensation of dread was no mere backdrop. It directed the entire show. Earlier that week, I've been working on drafting a proposal for a project that could redefine my role. The pressure mounted in silence as I tried to anticipate every outcome, projecting setbacks and recalibrating variables. Yet, paradoxically, the more I scrutinized the details, the more disconnected I felt from my initial excitement. Reflecting on this, I saw how the desire for perfect control had morphed into a cage where indecision thrived. I was no longer responding to real circumstances. I was reacting to imagined catastrophes rehearsed repeatedly in my head. Every negative projection whispered louder than any evidence of positive potential, weaving a narrative that stifled action. During a walk in the park the next afternoon, I observed groups of people laughing, moving easily between choices and conversations. Their fluidity stood in stark contrast to the rigidity tightening my thoughts. I wondered what allowed them to glide through decisions with such apparent ease. It dawned on me that their emotional responses, whether hope, curiosity, or cautious optimism, flowed as currents beneath their choices, not obstacles. Unlike me, who tried to tame feelings into neat categories, they navigated with a subtle trust in their internal compass. My mental loops, in contrast, were starved of feelings. They were reflections on reflection itself, spinning in abstract circles. Later, a friend shared with me a metaphor that changed how I view overthinking. She compared it to a flashlight that shifts aim wildly, lighting up fragments of a dark room, but never fixing on a path clear enough to walk. That image stayed with me, revealing how my analytical streak darted between scattered thoughts without steadying on what truly mattered. This fragmented spotlight hindered momentum, scattering my attention instead of focusing it. I noticed that to step forward effectively, I had to both acknowledge and embrace the emotional undercurrents signaling what required my closer care. One evening, as the sky dimmed to twilight, I tried a new approach inspired by this insight. Instead of interrogating every possible outcome, I invited myself to sense what reaction each thought evoked. Was it anxiety, excitement, curiosity, or something else? This shift revealed patterns I had overlooked. Certain worries masked deeper desires, and some fears highlighted boundaries I respected without naming. Giving these feelings space helped me move beyond sterile analysis into a richer dialogue within. It was as though I'd been staring at a map without understanding the terrain, and now, with emotion as guide, the routes began to emerge. That same night, I scribbled in my journal about a memory when I let emotion lead over logic. It was a spontaneous decision to join a late-night art class, one I had almost dismissed, saying, "I need more time to prepare." Instead, I followed a flicker of excitement that challenged my habitual doubt. The experience was messy and imperfect, but that imperfection sparked momentum. This recollection taught me that acting on feelings, even when logic resists, is often a gateway to clarity, not confusion. It encouraged me to redefine what progress looks like, not flawless certainty, but courageous, imperfect movement. Driving home the next day, the exhaustion from mental overexertion was palpable, yet beneath it lay a subtle warmth. I realized that cultivating emotional awareness required vulnerability, and opening up to these feelings was uncomfortable. However, within that discomfort, I found invitations for growth and novel perspectives I would have missed otherwise. The realization settled in deeply. Overthinking thrives in emotional voids, but when feelings are welcomed and understood, stagnant cycles begin to unravel. During a dimly lit dinner with family, I noticed how often I masked indecision beneath polite smiles or overqualification in conversation. This performance cramped authenticity, reinforcing isolation from the self and others. Sharing this vulnerability, admitting where I hesitated or felt overwhelmed, became a radical act of reclaiming agency. It sparked richer dialogue and eased the burden of solitary rumination. I discovered that emotional transparency, even brief and imperfect, can dissolve inner barricades built from fear of judgment or failure. As days passed, I experimented with practices that tuned me into bodily sensations accompanying specific lines of thought. When a certain worry surfaced, I paused to notice where tension lived. Was it a knot in my stomach, a tight chest, or a rush in my hands? Allowing these physical cues to inform or temper my reflections deepened my understanding beyond cerebral activity alone. I began to realize decision-making is as much an embodied art as it is conceptual science. Leaning into this somatic wisdom offered a new horizon for escaping repetitive mental loops. Looking back, I perceive overthinking less as a static condition and more as a dynamic dance between intellect and emotion. When the balance tips too far, by favoring label-less logic over feeling, action can freeze and energy dissipates. Learning to attune to emotional signals without discarding analytical skills proved transformative. It invited me to step from circular doubts into purposeful flow, from paralysis to movement powered by nuanced awareness. This shift does not erase uncertainty, but transforms it from railing obstacles into guiding textures that color the journey ahead. Now, consider how this applies when you face a decision that triggers your own flood of thoughts. What if instead of pushing aside or corralling your feelings, you invited them into dialogue? What new paths might unfold beneath the surface if you allowed emotional clarity to illuminate what raw logic overlooks? Perhaps, by weaving the felt sense of experience through your reflections, you'll find yourself stepping forward with a clearer anchor, less lost in mental coils, more alive with heartfelt direction. I sat across from my younger brother at a busy cafe, watching him nervously twist his coffee cup between trembling fingers. He had just confessed his endless cycle of replaying conversations, dissecting social interactions until confidence dissolved into anxiety. His eyes searched mine, pleading for solutions that felt just beyond reach. As he spoke, the room's background hum faded into a distant pulse, while inside, his mind spun elaborate scenarios, each critique of his words amplified, each imagined misstep etched deeply. Observing this, I realized overthinking often sprouts from a place of longing for connection, yet ironically erects walls between us and vulnerability. "Why can't I just say what I mean?" he muttered, frustration tightening his jaw. I hear myself overanalyzing every reaction, and then I freeze. His voice cracked, and I recognized the familiar shadow that visited my own mind during moments of self-doubt. Overthinking doesn't simply paralyze. It silences the authentic voice craving to emerge. Inspired to help, I shared a practice I turned to in those darker moments, embracing silence as a form of dialogue. Instead of battling with every recurring thought, I began to carve gentle pauses in the torrent, allowing space to feel the stirrings beneath anxious patterns. This practice didn't erase worries overnight, but it softened their grip, revealing a subtle rhythm beneath the chaos. Later that week, during a restless night, my mind circled again around a tough decision, an opportunity to relocate for work, promising growth yet demanding leaving familiar comforts. Instead of locking myself in overanalysis, I tried an unusual exercise, writing a letter to my future self, uninhibited by fear or second-guessing. In this letter, I painted a vivid scene of living boldly, embracing uncertainty with curiosity. While drafting, emotions bubbled unexpectedly. Excitement mingled with trembling vulnerability, as if inviting me to stop hiding behind loops of doubt. This act of imagining an empowered self reshaped my perspective, nudging me from inertia toward possibility. At a local park the following afternoon, I noticed a group of children playing a simple game of tag. Their laughter spilled freely. No calculations about risk or consequence hindered their movements. Watching them, a thought struck me. Overthinking often dulls our childlike spontaneity. In youth, we chase curiosity without paralyzing hesitation, until learned fears and guarded expectations creep in. Reclaiming that sense of playful exploration requires conscious unlearning to step out of mental quicksand into a vibrant flow. I decided then to map small moments where I could invite the unexpected back into daily rhythms, a chance to surprise my own mind and break ingrained patterns. A few days later, during a team brainstorming session, my pulse quickened as ideas raised sparked immediate internal critiques. Yet I caught a shift. Instead of snuffing out emerging thoughts to avoid potential errors, I began voicing incomplete thoughts aloud, embracing imperfection in real time. The room responded with curiosity, not judgment. That improvised sharing birthed collaborative sparks otherwise stifled by self-censorship. Experiencing this, I understood that overthinking often masquerades as preparation but can mutate into a barrier against authentic expression. The act of releasing the need for mental polish invited fresh energy and deepened trust in others and in myself. In the solitude of early morning hours, I pondered these moments and recognized a critical insight. The mind thrives on narrative, crafting stories to explain, predict, or control. However, these constructed stories can spiral into elaborate tapestries that obscure rather than clarify. Breaking free requires meeting these stories with gentle skepticism, questioning their accuracy instead of accepting them as facts. This reflective stance creates a doorway from automatic rumination to conscious choice, allowing mental space for alternative narratives grounded in compassion and realistic possibilities. Another layer unveiled itself during a casual phone call with an old friend. As she recounted her struggles juggling responsibilities and inner doubts, she described her breakthrough in recognizing decision fatigue. She explained how incessant mental weighing tires the mind, draining clarity and courage. Together, we brainstormed ways to streamline choices, from limiting options to setting small deadlines. This conversation underscored that cognitive overload fuels overthinking. Cultivating boundaries around mental energy becomes essential, a way to preserve vitality and sharpen focus on what truly aligns with our values and goals. On an impulsive whim, I enrolled in a dance class far removed from my usual routines. Embarking into unfamiliar movement demanded trust in my body's cues over mind's constant commentary. Early missteps and fumbling sequences triggered familiar self-judgments, but with practice, I surrendered to the music's flow. The experience illuminated a vital lesson. Embodied action anchors us in the present, bypassing the mind's endless reruns. Engaging the body frees creativity and awakens internal wisdom often drowned out by mental noise. This embodied awakening cultivated a fiercer resolve to translate insight into vibrant action outside the studio. Recently, under a sweep of starry night sky, I journaled about these threads weaving through my days. I recognized a paradox at the heart of overthinking. While we crave control over uncertainty, true mastery comes from dancing with unpredictability's rhythms. Growth emerges not in flawless planning, but in willingness to embrace missteps as steps forward. This awareness softens my grip on rigid mental frameworks and opens space for adaptive, compassionate engagement with life's unfolding. It beckons me to choose trust, tangible effort, and presence over endless hypothesis, lighting pathways through inner fog toward grounded clarity. Now, consider how this applies when you face moments where your own thoughts spiral into webs of hesitation. Might there lie power in pausing to listen deeply to what your heart yearns beneath the swirl? Could crafting your own candid letter to future self awaken dormant strength within? Or might trying unfamiliar, physical ways of moving through fear release you from mental bindings? These paths lead not away from complexity, but through it, guiding us from paralysis toward purposeful, embodied emergence. Reflecting on the winding path that has led me here, I sense an intricate interplay unfolding inside me, like tangled threads of light weaving through shadow, neither simply bright nor dark, but complex and alive. There's a rhythm emerging from the seeming chaos, subtle but unmistakable, coaxing me toward a horizon that until now remained just out of reach. It's as if the storm of restless thinking is giving way to a quieter current, not by overpowering the waves with sheer force, but by embracing their ebb and flow with openness. I find myself standing at the edge of that current, feeling its invitation to move forward with a newfound gentleness and resolve. The echoes of countless internal dialogues ripple within me. Unheard conversations that once echoed endlessly now settle into a more measured cadence. These voices no longer compete for dominance, but hum in harmony, sometimes urgent, other times tender, guiding rather than imprisoning me. I realize that the space where struggle meets surrender is more expansive than I imagined, unfolding like a vast field beneath a shifting sky. This field isn't free from storms, but holds room for rain and sun, the fertile tension where growth quietly roots itself. I recall a moment during a late afternoon walk when a sudden breeze stirred a loose leaf into dizzying spins, caught briefly between being carried away and finding solid ground. Watching the fragile dance outside me, I felt mirrored inside, a swirling of intentions and doubts, hopes and fears, caught in delicate balance. Yet as the leaf finally settled, so did a sense within my chest. Movement does not require perfect steadiness, and landing may come in unpredictable moments when resistance softens unexpectedly. It strikes me that embracing uncertainty is less like surrendering control and more like inviting an ally into the circles of my thoughts, transforming turbulence into momentum. Sometimes, I catch myself imagining life as a vast and ancient forest. For years, I wandered its dense thickets, my footsteps hesitant, circling the same trees in search of a clear path. But now, glimpses of light filtering through the canopy tease an opening, an invitation to step into a glade where choices can emerge with less weight, more clarity. This sanctuary does not erase complexity or risk. Instead, it reframes them as companions rather than barriers. Within this space, fear's voice softens and curiosity rises, weaving a tapestry where decision and action entwine more freely. There is a tenderness in acknowledging imperfections, a quiet power in allowing space for restless thoughts without striving to silence them. It is like learning a new language, one spoken in nuances of feeling, where meaning laces through sensation and intuition alongside reason. I sense that mastery isn't about commanding every element with certainty. It is about cultivating an intimate relationship with my inner landscape, honoring its contours and rhythms, and trusting that movement born from such trust carries profound wisdom. This journey nudges me away from the illusion of linear progress toward embracing a spiral, a graceful, unfolding evolution. We circle ideas, return to questions with fresh eyes and hearts, discovering dimensions previously hidden. There is liberation in recognizing that stepping forward does not demand perfect clarity up front, but invites faithful engagement amid ambiguity. Each tentative act becomes sacred, a pulse in the living cadence between reflection and emergence. I invite you now, as I stand in this space with you, to feel the shifting energies inside yourself. Notice the tension dissolving into possibility, fragmented thoughts slowly weaving into pattern. There is no rush to grasp final answers here, just an openness to what stirs in the quiet intervals. Together, we imagine that future moments may arrive not burdened by paralyzing hesitation, but buoyed by this softer, fiercer knowing that within uncertainty lies a seed yearning to grow. The story is not yet complete, but a new chapter beckons, one we move toward with steady breath and open heart. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when the world softens and the noise inside my head dims just enough, I catch a glimpse of something profound, an invitation that asks me not to resist the swirling currents within, but to enter their flow with courage. It's as if the restless energy that once imprisoned me, the tangled web of endless reflection, is not my enemy, but a part of my story waiting to be embraced and transformed. That realization breathes life into my being in ways words rarely capture. I feel a subtle shift, a gentle loosening in the grip of hesitation, ushering me toward a place where action and understanding coexist in delicate balance. There was a time when I believed clarity had to come before movement, when I thought that every step demanded perfect preparation, each decision weighed with unyielding precision. But what I've learned, sometimes through painful trial and moments of vulnerability, is that true clarity often reveals itself in the taking of a step. I recall a night, under a canopy of stars flickering shyly above, when I felt the stirrings of doubt and excitement knotting together inside me. Instead of retreating into overanalysis, I chose to lean into the uncertainty, to let my feet trace the path without knowing exactly where it would lead. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, the kind of moment that feels like standing at the edge of a great ocean, both trembling and alive. In that vulnerable space, I discovered a different kind of intelligence, one that lives not solely in calculation but in trust in my own resilience, in the unfolding journey, and in the whispers of intuition that often get lost in the chatter. This wisdom doesn't demand perfection or guarantee certainty. Instead, it invites me to dance with doubt, to listen deeply to the language of my emotions without being silenced by them. I realize now that liberation comes when I loosen the tight grip of control and allow motion to accompany inquiry, releasing the endless loop that once ensnared me. I remember sharing these thoughts with a dear friend, whose own story mirrored mine in so many ways. She smiled knowingly and said, "Maybe our overthinking isn't the obstacle, it's the signal." That remark settled in my heart, resonating like a bell across still waters. It reframed the struggle entirely. What if the swirl of thoughts isn't a breakdown but a breakthrough? The mind's way of calling attention to what yearns for healing, clarity, or courage. This insight has invited me to stop waging war against the currents within and instead to chart a course through them, allowing the process itself to teach me new forms of strength and grace. There is a compelling beauty in the imperfection of progress, the way steps taken without guarantees hold their own kind of power. In embracing that beauty, I've watched hesitation transform from a prison into a doorway, from a barrier into a threshold. I see now that action needn't wait for absolute readiness. The act of moving forward births wisdom that pondering alone cannot manufacture. This revelation changes everything because it frees me to live fully in the tension between uncertainty and hope, weaving them together into a tapestry that is uniquely mine. Walking this path has made me realize that endurance doesn't emerge from suppression, but from conversation, with oneself, with fear, and with the unknown. I've learned to treat my inner doubts not as enemies to vanquish, but as allies to understand, messengers carrying messages that, once heard with compassion, ceased to hold me captive. This relational shift opens spaces within where creativity, spontaneity, and joy can reemerge, inviting a more vibrant way of being alive. Tonight, as I let these reflections settle, I feel a quiet confidence rising like the dawn, steady, patient, and unwavering. It is not the blazing certainty of answers found, but the deep trust in the unfolding of questions lived fully. I invite you to imagine standing beside me at this sunrise moment, feeling the expansive potential that comes when we choose presence over paralysis, curiosity over fear, and movement over stagnation. Let this not be an end, but a beginning, a call to carry forward with intention and tenderness, knowing each step writes a new chapter in the story only you can tell.